How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Deciduous Bonsai podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Robson, a deciduous bonsai professional here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm joined with my co-host, Maciek.
Good morning.
Good morning. This morning we are going to talk about collecting deciduous trees here on the West Coast. In our last episode, I had a guest with me, Daniel Yope, where we talked about collecting deciduous trees in the eastern half of North America. And today we're going to focus on talking about something that you and I do a lot, which is collect deciduous trees here in the western half of North America, primarily the Pacific Northwest.
Yep.
Maciek, what have you been collecting lately?
Lately, still mostly cottonwood.
Yep.
I think actually maybe the only thing I've collected in deciduous this year is cottonwood and other types of poplar.
Yeah, you're the cottonwood king. You're
maybe.
You're the one who kind of sparked my interest in intriguing cottonwood. I'm curious, why cottonwood? Like whatever drove you to that tree, that species?
It's actually kind of silly. The reality is that I just came upon interesting material in the mountains that was in a permit legal zone.
Like you weren't necessarily looking for it. You
no,
just happened upon it.
I didn't know what it was until a few weeks later. So it took me a little while to fully identify it, and I had a lot of hints, because I had to dig, and I noticed that actually the tree that I collected was merely a node on a giant root, sort of traveling along the road. So it was a chance encounter while hiking and looking for material just generally and seeing what's out there. But it wasn't something that I ran into randomly on a different type of hike. I was looking in places where I thought there might be interesting trees due to certain geographical factors.
So you and I have been probably messaging and talking about cottonwood for the better part of 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And those 2-3 years of conversations, like I know you're thoroughly obsessed with this species now. Like even though you weren't necessarily looking for cottonwood or even realized that you collected one, was it an interesting species before you got that first tree and brought it home? Like was it ever on your radar in terms of cool trees?
It wasn't, and I think that coming across it, interpreting what it was, and then learning more about it. Once I had it home and was marveling at how beautiful the material was, I just had to know everything about it.
Okay, and that's what started the deep dive.
Yeah, and how it fit into my region and what the physiology was, and where could I see more of it? Was there some in my neighborhood? And it turns out I'm surrounded by it.
Yeah, cottonwood is like, when you think about trees here in the Pacific Northwest, it's not one that you necessarily think of first when you're thinking about deciduous trees. You probably think of big leaf maple. If you're in the bonsai world, you probably think of vine maple. You think of alder, definitely. But at least here where I live in the valley, like you drive down the Clackamas River or the Willamette River, and there's like nothing but cottonwoods. It's just like a sea of cottonwoods. They're actually all kind of like yellow right now, just about to lose their
anywhere
leaves.
There's an artery of water traveling through the landscape that is probably accessible most months of the year. Even in the high desert. If there's water traveling through an area all 12 months of the year, then you will find cottonwood there.
Yeah, that's where I've every single one that I only have 3 cottonwoods, 3 big ones that I've collected, but every single one was in like a little mountain creek area that I collected.
The first cottonwood that I came across that I dug up was within earshot of running water.
Okay.
Yeah, in a snowmelt zone, in a big rock fall zone, like a half destroyed hillside kind of zone with lots of rushing water and snow melt and things like that.
Does that give you a clue in terms of what happens in a bonsai pot? Have you noticed that cottonwoods demand a lot of water?
Yes. Yeah, by far more than any other species.
I've noticed that too. For me, it's very similar to a wisteria. I'm probably watering this cottonwood and the other 2 big ones I have as much as I do the wisterias, which in the summertime might be an extra watering or 2 a day, which is a lot. It might not be a species you want if you have a very long work schedule away from home, or you do the wisteria trick and maybe you put it in a little pan of water, but.
This is an especially thirsty species, I think, when it has room to grow.
Yeah.
When it has room to grow and it knows it, it's figured out that it's in a big box with lots of room, that it's
Yeah.
uncontested room.
Yeah.
That's when it really chugs water. And that's when you get really, really long runners and just huge, unbridled growth.
Yeah.
Big, huge leaves, and all that stuff, all that good stuff that we want.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they're a really interesting species. We've been talking a lot about the cottonwoods in that, we don't know if they're going to work well for bonsai, and this is something that I think, it's not like there's a good data point or comparison for something in Japan. They have poplars in Japan. They don't use them for bonsai.
Yeah. And I would say, just from my brief experience with black poplar, Populus nigra, which is pretty closely related
Which
to
is the one that we're
cottonwood.
collecting, right?
No, this is Populus trichocarpa.
Okay.
Populus nigra is black poplar,
Okay.
sort of the Lombardy poplar from Italy, the very tall, sort of skinny poplars.
Are those ones that you would see in like Poland?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
In Poland and other places, just all over Europe, actually. Maybe even some parts of the Mediterranean areas, things like that. But my brief experience with that species, and also just observing black poplar in northwestern Oregon and in suburban situations, that species is even more diebacky. It is even more
interesting.
Live and die, live and die, live and die. Colonize, keep moving, live and die, live and die. Colonize, keep moving. It's even more dramatic. I guess. Yeah, we're getting into the nitty gritty of what makes this difficult, and the question of will it be sustainable?
I mean, because we don't know. Like, there is not one cottonwood bonsai that I can point to that's a show tree. And so that should always, I think, raise a little bit of skepticism. It shouldn't hinder anybody from collecting and experimenting and being passionate about things. But I wouldn't get hopes up to a certain level just because if there's not an established roadmap, we're in uncharted territory. And we just don't know if it's going to work well. It could be a plant that just, like manzanita, just does not enjoy being in a bonsai pot. Or I guess manzanita is more just doesn't like being collected in general. These seem to be perfectly easy to collect, which is why I like them. I mean, have you found them easy to collect and to grow?
Yeah, I would say not only are they easy to collect, but and this is kind of a weird two-sided coin of cottonwood, is in that it's famous for dieback, and yet it's definitely immortal. In the most ridiculous sense. I mean, I've never had a cutting at any time of year, June, July, August, September, any month of the year you can name. If I took a cutting of cottonwood, it always roots.
That's pretty remarkable. It's like almost like a willow in that way.
In that way, it is like a willow. Even during our heat dome, where I got to 117 Fahrenheit or whatever, I had a cutting of cottonwood, of my collected cottonwood, that was maybe 3 or 4 feet long in a glass vase on my sunny deck next to my pines, and that immediately blasted roots into that glass vase. During that heat. So it's some kind of monster.
It's a propagation monster. And my experience with collecting these has been incredibly easy. Like in a way that makes me just want to get more and more, because I mean it's the easiest thing I've ever collected. I brought I have 3 monsters like this one in the video here that I've collected, which is not a big data set, but and I've collected a few small ones along the way too. But I collected these with basically no fine roots. They had maybe 3 or 4 big saw cuts that were like 4 inches in diameter. And I collected them in the winter after, or late fall, I would say, after they dropped their change color and dropped their leaves. And brought them home, put them in the greenhouse, but didn't give them any special care or anything like that. And then by spring, I had roots growing in through the bottom of the pots into the gravel in the greenhouse. Like it was just like you couldn't stop this thing from surviving. Like I was impressed.
Yeah, it makes sense. Just thinking about the geographical context where these trees exist. Sometimes I mean, you drive out from here in Portland to John Day, out in the middle of halfway to Idaho, or 3/4 of the way to Idaho, not high desert, and you will see places that get less than 3 inches of rain a year.
Yeah.
And then there will be cottonwoods lined up along the riverbanks.
Yeah, well, one of the things that makes me really excited
crazy.
about cottonwood is that I think it would have a really good geographical versatility for people. If you're in the western United States, or really probably most places in the United States, I don't know how these would do with extreme heat, but like if you're in Utah or if you're in Idaho, if you're in any of the northern western states, I think it would be a wonderful species to have in a bonsai pot. I think it would tolerate that climate really well.
It breaks some assumptions about bonsai that I have. For example, it's a water-thirsty species, therefore the foliage must burn easily in the sun. I mean,
but it's actually quite thick and durable,
the only places
right?
I see these trees is in extremely sunny places.
Yeah.
Right? Often at high elevation, 5,000 feet, 4,000 feet, you'll see these, especially in places like Colorado and Utah. There'll be tons of cottonwood out there. They transitioned to aspen, I guess, but hopefully the point stands that they are not sun intolerant.
Yeah, they can take a lot. They can take a lot of sun. They can take a lot of cold. They can take a lot of, I think, everything that we throw at them.
Yeah.
Which makes them really versatile in a way that vine maple, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, if you take a vine maple over to Utah, I think it's going to struggle. Like you're going to have to work really, really hard. It'll be like a sport to keep that going.
Yeah. Well, let's be fair though. It is perhaps we don't yet have a verdict on these either. These might also be sport bonsai to some extent.
Yeah.
Right. In the sense that you have to stay on top of it. It's its own sub hobby of bonsai.
Yeah.
To be good at.
Yeah, it's like if you think bonsai are needy, like wait till you get a sport bonsai
exactly.
and have to put in all that effort. But no, and I think the jury is very much still out. But I think things that are really promising about cottonwood are it's easy to collect. I think it's plentiful to collect, meaning once you find an environment where you have some interesting trees, and we can talk about what interesting trees look like, but I think there's probably going to be a high density of them in a way that when we collect vine maple, it's very low density collecting. Like I can't go to a site and there's like 30 vine maples that I want to collect. I maybe go out 10, 15 times and maybe not even find one.
There might be plenty of them around, but not necessarily collectible.
Not ones that have interest that we would want for bonsai.
Yeah.
So I think these might have good numbers. I think they have good versatility. I actually like that they get that beautiful fall color. I mean, if you're driving along the Willamette River here in the valley, it's just stunning. And late November, right around Thanksgiving, when all the cottonwoods along the river are just that really golden yellow. I hope we get that in a bonsai pot. We're still kind of
And do you remember you did an episode of the Bonsai Wire? One of my favorite episodes of Bonsai Wire is you and Jonas talking about native trees, native deciduous.
Yeah.
And I think the question came up like, what is native?
What is native?
Does native mean U.S. or does native mean near you? But here's the thing about cottonwood is there are cottonwood species all the way from the Mexican border, all the way to Alaska, and all the way to like Maine or whatever.
Yeah.
My parents in Ontario have eastern cottonwood nearby.
Yeah. Yeah. For those who don't know what you're talking about, that point was, if you live in Boston, a Rocky Mountain juniper, even though it's in the border of the United States, is nowhere near native to you because Rocky Mountain juniper grows 2,000 miles away. Like a tree from Europe could potentially be closer.
Closer in terms of biome. And
Yeah, so it's native kind of only applies to what grows in your area. And if you live in a place like we do, where we live in kind of a microclimate. If you go on the other side of the Cascades, what's native over there is not really what's native over here. It might survive, but it's not going to thrive in the natural kind of environment.
That's actually something for people who are listening to this and thinking, what's my cottonwood of my area? If you live in an area that has quite a gradient of different types of environments and temperatures and biomes and things like that, you might find a species like cottonwood that exists all the way from the coast all the way to the Rockies or whatever that is for you. Well, but it might have different genetics.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this from Colorado, I think they do have cottonwood out there, but they also have aspen, another great type of poplar.
And they hybridize a bit.
Yeah. So it's I was just at Ryan Neal's yesterday, Bonsai Mirai, and I saw Dan and Steve, the Backcountry boys, had just dropped off maybe 5 or 6 aspens that were really cool trees.
Yeah, they have some good ones.
Yeah. So it's fun to see people play with like other types of poplar that might be kind of more kind of closer to their region.
Yep.
But no, it's a really fun species to play with and explore. It's the thing that I worry about with cottonwood is going to be, can we build a high level of density and not have to constantly fight dieback?
That's the difficult part. I think somebody on a forum, I think it was Bonsai Nut, said something along the lines of, and I'm sorry that I don't remember who this was, but they said a very wise thing, which was either you tell the willow what you want it to do, or it will tell you what it wants to do. Like you decide for the willow, or it decides for you. And this is the willow family that we're talking about.
It is, yeah.
Willows, poplars, cottonwoods, they're all
Aspen,
kind of aspen. They're all kind of in this zone of interesting weirdness together.
Are salix and poplar, if you go like one step up, are they related?
Yeah, they're both in Salicaceae, or Salicaceae, or however you want to say it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that they root as easily and whatnot.
There's some other interesting things that are similar between willows and cottonwoods, where if cottonwood gets vigorous enough and is in a sort of like colonization mode, initial recovery after collection, or maybe like the second season after collection, you'll see the leaf shape.
The leaf's interesting. Change. It starts as like something that looks like a beech, and then it kind of folds down to like that normal kind of aspen-like.
The sort of cardioid kind of heart shape, all the way out to a willow leaf style if you get one pumping as a little seedling.
Is that what we call arugula growth?
Oh, arugula growth is the type of leaf that you see.
That's our nickname.
This is just a joke. This is an insight thing where when you get suckers on this species,
and they have like a really different leaf, right?
The leaf is very dramatically different, and it kind of looks like arugula-like. There's really no other way to describe it. It's just kind of the sort of manifolding and folding in and kind of doing this weird thing. It's not as sort of straight and elegant looking. It's having a dramatic growth experience. It's assembling itself wild. In a weird way.
It's the amount of different leaves that this plant makes is like not like anything else that I have here in the garden. Like it's
I would almost call it a populus polymorpha or something like that.
It's wild. So going back to sustainability, that's my main question with cottonwood is this going to be sustainable? And by the way, if you're listening to this and you've collected cottonwood or any other in the poplar family, feel free to drop a comment in the comment section of the video. Reach out to us on Reddit or social media, because it's something that we're really interested in learning a lot more of, because we're on the brink of understanding what this species is. We still have a lot to learn.
I think we have some theories. I think that this will be the species. This is just a theory, and I imagine that people who've grown willow, it goes back to the decide for the willow or it decides for you. I think it's a species where balancing growth will be important, because from what we've seen so far, especially with suckers, there's some evidence, some compelling possible evidence that it wants to follow its own vigor path, devoid of what you want to do with it.
Energy balance will be a real trick thing to figure out. And like you were saying, if we cut a lot of the suckers out, which this tree loves to grow, which I cut them out every other week almost, then it seems to just like on a normal shrub bonsai, it keeps the rest of the tree strong, the part of the tree that we care about.
I think that was the main thing that tamed cottonwood for me. When I started to study here, my cottonwood started to act a lot more.
Because when you started here, I didn't know this species. We were guessing, but it's like, well, we know what happens with Coralopsis and winterberry or chorchabai is when you have these shrubby type growth plants and they sucker that just
azalea, I think, is a little bit like that too. Lots of the suckers coming out of the ground.
And azaleas will even sucker off the trunk, like just in a way that cottonwood can do too. And
so I was blind to these effects, and until I came to you, I didn't even realize that was the problem. And I was proud of these huge runners I was getting out of the base of my tree. But I think I would say it was similar to this tree, and if you're listening to this, it's like a 4 or 5 foot tree, but I lost the upper 3 feet of the tree because of these suckers. And then after we tamed it, it's been a lot easier. And the fight to keep growth is a lot more localized. It's a lot less like, a branch on this side of the tree can kill the entire other side of the tree. It's more just like twig by twig basis at this point. So that's why I have some hope. But just imagine looking into the future how difficult that will be for show trees and things like that.
What is
Or
this
maybe
gonna?
make it easy.
How is this gonna mature? Like, does it get
Yeah.
easier as it matures? And it, maybe one of my hypotheses is, if we get a lot more ramification, it's gonna sucker less, and then it will just start to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
The older and more ramified it gets.
Yeah. If you are out there and you're collecting cottonwood and you see suckers and you're wondering why you're getting dieback and things like that, tame the suckers.
Tame the suckers. Yeah.
Yeah, first, and then things will get a lot easier.
Yeah. That's the biggest trick we found in our 2-3 years of playing with this is tame the suckers.
Tame the suckers, and understand that collection is a big stress.
Yeah.
For any tree, even one that's super easy to collect. It still may interpret the collection as a major stress.
Yeah, that's right. I've noticed cottonwoods, like the energy kind of changes like after that initial year of collection. Like right when I collect them, they come out with super strong growth and they're hard right out of the gate, and then they start to slow down a little bit.
Exactly my experience. Yeah,
Interesting.
For every single one, whether it's a cutting or a collection.
Yeah.
It's always that.
Well, and it brings up a really good point that if you're doing collecting of deciduous species, one of the biggest differences between collecting conifers and deciduous is make the cuts where you want to make them right when you collect, because you're going to get a lot of energy out of those cut sites, and so it gives you the most kind of potential for building where you want to be building on the tree, rather than have the tree kind of stall out because it loses its stored energy and its recovery from the collection, and then have to prune it back hard later and re-energize the plant. So that's a big thing with collecting deciduous is chop them wherever you see the bonsai being, at the time of collection. You never do that with a conifer. You never do any pruning or anything like that when you're collecting.
You gotta keep all the energy.
Yeah,
on the tree
keep all of that. But with the deciduous, it's the complete opposite. Cut it exactly where you want it. Do a hard cut up on top. Do a hard cut on the roots, and do it at like the time of collection.
If it's a big tree, it's kind of by definition loaded with energy. Right?
That's right. Yeah. Especially these cottonwoods, I think, which are just powerhouses of energy. And that's another kind of good point too that brings up, is that when we're collecting deciduous, there are some exceptions to this, but by and large, collecting deciduous, you're not. This tree that I have behind me looked like a Christmas tree when I got it. It was like literally Christmas tree shape. It was like 12 feet tall, just like a Christmas tree pyramid of branching. I cut, the top, 9 feet of it off and brought home the bottom 3 feet. And that's a huge difference. It's not something that looks like a.
What gives you that intuition though? What's going through your mind when you're doing that?
Yeah, it's
other than fit it in my truck.
Right. So with deciduous bonsai, I think the trunk tells about 50% of the story, and the branching tells the other 50%. Versus with Yamadori conifer bonsai, or really just any conifer bonsai, the trunk tells 95% of the story, and the branching tells 5%. Yeah. It's all about the trunk. And when you see conifer bonsai, years later, we can look at a juniper in Japan, 50 years ago, and look at it today. It looks like the same exact tree.
Yeah, the trunk is mostly the same.
Yeah. You might decorate it differently the way you arrange the branches, but the trunk is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Deciduous is not like that at all. It's, the branching adds so much to the story and the character, because these are fractal patterns, they're not trunks to a degree. And so we just need the launch pad for that fractal pattern to start.
Yeah, the springboard,
Yeah, that springboard. And so that's deciduous. And so oftentimes, we talked about it on last week's podcast with Daniel Yope, to where when we're collecting beech, we're collecting forest trees, and it's not like you walk up and you see a finished beech, bonsai ready to go in a pot and be styled. Even, when I talked to Maria, my friend in Croatia who collects these amazing hornbeams, these are big trees that they're cutting down. Her famous tree, the Emperor, was 15 feet tall, 20 feet tall when she collected it.
If you look really closely at her material, you can see there's a lot of building.
There's a lot of building. And that's the other difference too, is it's not just put some wire on it and put it in a show right away. It's probably a 10 to 15 year trajectory from when you get it in, you bring it home, this cottonwood here behind me, you get it home, probably 10 years is when I would expect, the arc of when I can start thinking about showing it.
Mm-hmm. Because you've taken a few iterations to build out that canopy.
Yeah. So, and then we build the primary and secondary branching and all that, and then ramify it. So that's kind of.
Would you think about say a sugar maple in those terms? That I'm looking for something that I want to use as a springboard. It doesn't give me most of what I need, but it gives me like a 3/4 or 1/3 of what I need, and I'm going to do the final 2/3.
That's right.
For the 10 to 15 years after collection.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a starting point, and you're just building the rest of the tree there.
Right.
Versus conifer, you have the bulk of it, and you're just decorating it the way that you arrange the branches. So very, very different. These don't look like bonsai when we collect them. The difference is they don't look like normal forest trees either, because they have interest in that initial 1, 2, 3 feet that we're kind of collecting and bringing home.
Something about that site, something about that zone where you found it, much like the Cottonwood site where the Rockfall site where I first found that Cottonwood was south-facing, a big sort of open zone with the canopy cleared away due to the rockfall and due to the gravel road going through. So lots and lots of snow. Wow. And so every single one of these things on the ground is crushed into a little pretzel or some kind of bent thing, not unlike the one that's next to us right now, which is rather twisted and contorted.
Yeah. It's something to give it interest, so it's not just a telephone pole.
Yeah, but it doesn't build that whole tree. It just gives me a good starting point.
That's right.
So that's a way of talking about wild Yamadori or wild trees that I have not really thought about until just recently talking to you.
Yeah, it's what we look for is just a very different thing than imagine going to the Rocky Mountains and collecting these ponderosa pines that just look like bonsai in their environment. These deciduous do not look like bonsai when we collect them.
No.
But they do have that interest in that initial segment of the tree, and that's what we're collecting, and that's what we're often chopping back to. I mean, it doesn't even have to be that interesting. Like sometimes when you collect a beech, you could literally collect a formal upright beech that just has a little bit of flare at the base, and that's all you need. You can build a beautiful branch structure off of that. With the cottonwoods, I think we've been able to find these really interesting forms.
Right.
And so it's been fun to kind of experiment with those different things. And the thing that I'll say too is if you're new to collecting, let yourself be surprised by some things. The tree that I have behind me is probably the best cottonwood that I've collected. And it's the one that I thought would have been the worst when I was actually out on the site.
Because it's a big, tangled, weird thing. It's hard to see.
It looks like some octopusy, crazy, contorted thing. And I didn't really see that because I just saw the big Christmas tree. In fact, I almost just didn't collect this tree because I just wrote it off as something that was not what I was looking for.
Yep.
So let yourself kind of be surprised with some of these things, because I think, when you're going collecting and you have expectations, that's when you get disappointed the most. And that's what until cottonwood was on my radar, I wasn't necessarily looking for cottonwood. I was just looking for trunks. I'll collect any, be it an alder, be it a vine maple, be it a big leaf maple. I was just like, what has an interesting, cool, low trunk?
Exactly. I came across it because I was kind of conducting a geographical search. I had reduced my search space to areas of disturbance or areas that were south-facing or areas that were getting a lot of crushing snow during certain parts or areas that were simply just hikeable to or reachable or permit legal in this case. In that case, it was permit legal in the particular forest that we're talking about. So you have to really reduce your search space first and think in terms of the 15 or 20 woody species, deciduous species that are in your region. So if you're in Ohio, search for that. There is a website, by the way, for Ohio that's like the deciduous species or the tree species of Ohio, and in it there's a beautiful list of deciduous species. And you go on a site or an app like iNaturalist, you reduce it down to just the areas that'd be worth looking. Then you crack open Google Earth or Google Maps, you put it into satellite mode, you put it into topographical mode, you start looking for bogs or streams or disturbance sites like clear cuts or fire zones or some recent urban development or something, right? Something other than just well-developed land.
I think the thing that I've learned recently with collecting, and this is talking to people like you and especially like Randy and Maria, is that I always thought in my head there's these places where there's just going to be trees everywhere that you can collect. And in Wyoming, where they collect Rocky Mountain junipers, 99% of Rocky Mountain junipers don't look like the ones that we want for bonsai.
No.
in Croatia, 99% of the hornbeams don't look like the ones that Maria is collecting.
Yeah, she makes it look easy.
She makes it look easy, and like you have this like fantasy in your head, like, oh man, I want to move to Croatia, and there's just going to be trees everywhere to collect. And when I was talking to her, she's like, no, that's absolutely not the case. Like there's like one spot that I found, and like we can get the trees from this one area, but in all the other areas, like there's just not a lot of. It's like less than 1% of the land.
It's always a diamond in the rough.
It's a diamond in the rough, yeah. And so it's
That's exciting though.
Yeah, it's not that you can't find something anywhere, but you look for these qualities like we were talking about lava fields earlier this morning. You look for these areas or conditions where growth can be stunted or tortured or whatnot. It doesn't necessarily have to be high elevation because the lava field we go to is not.
Or areas that are just natural nurseries for things.
Yeah.
And you have something where it was cleared 15 years ago, and now everything there is about 10.
Yeah.
And it's been ravaged through wind and snow.
Yeah, Scott Elser has a beautiful, I think it's his coastal Douglas fir that was just in the Expo that he collected from a logging site, and it was just getting run over by the logging trucks, and it's a wonderful cascade tree now. It's like like you said, a young tree, but it was in a condition, in an environment that was going to make tortured little trees.
So we might as well talk about alder since we're on the topic.
Let's talk about alder.
Yeah. So in the Pacific Northwest, a good place to think about alder is clear-cut sites.
Yeah.
Because one of the first things that comes in and colonizes a clear-cut site after they've taken away all the western red cedar.
Yeah, it's a pioneer species, right?
It's pioneer species like alder. They move in very quickly. You'll get millions of seedlings. You still have to become really nerdy about this and get good at knowing exactly the age of a given clear-cut, the kind of slash that you're digging through, because there'll be lots of stuff left behind by the loggers. But if you're lucky, you'll find a place that has relatively shallow topsoil on top of fairly thick clay, and so you'll have shallow seedlings with relatively flat root systems having to push their way through all this junk left behind by the clear cut, and you have twistiness, and you have that first few inches.
That's the other thing is don't discount movement that's underneath the soil, like you were just saying. I collect alder in a very different site up at high elevation, and even then, like they look like these chochabai shrub-like things, and then like you collect it and then you dig down the soil, and then underneath all of that shrubiness is like a really strong S-curve or like a really deep curve from under the soil that's now 2 inches thick.
A real diamond in the rough again.
Yeah, super diamond in the rough. So that's kind of exciting. Don't discount on some trees like that you can see some of that. I think when the trees get bigger, a lot of that just swells and is not necessarily the case, but with young trees, you definitely get a lot of movement underneath the soil.
So we are getting a little bit into the differences between the last podcast and this podcast. I would say most of what I heard about Eastern collecting tends to be not dominated, but land access tends to be a big thing.
Yeah.
Whereas we're so spoiled for choice for land access in the West.
We're pretty spoiled.
That actually it becomes more of an activity of just becoming like a geo-wizard, like someone who's really good at GeoGuessr.
And it's the tough thing about collecting out here is maybe with the exception of vine maple, most of the species that we're collecting do not have a proven track record for bonsai. Like you're not going to see alder in a Kokofu book either. However, alder, I would say, has a lot more track record than cottonwood, for example. Because, if you go to Michael Hagedorn's garden, he has a beautiful Arizona alder that's been in training for maybe 15 years plus. Really nice tree.
It's planted in like a concrete pot?
Yeah, it's some weird pot, but it's a beautiful, graceful
it's like a manhole
tree.
Cover or something, actually.
Yeah, and that tree's a good one to talk about because, Michael and I have discussed that tree quite a bit. And it doesn't have one thing about it that makes it exceptional. It's really disappointingly, as a deciduous enthusiast, like it has no fall color at all. Like the leaves just go from green to kind of half brown, half green, and then they fall off.
Yeah.
So like fall is like the absolute worst. Like so
Our local alder's doing that too.
local alders do that too. So it's alder as a species, that's probably why we don't see them in the nursery industry.
Yep.
Is because you're planting one in your yard. There's not like some X factor, fall color, spring color, flowers, there's not some specific thing that we can point to that says, oh wow, I love alder because.
Yeah.
However, you can ramify anything and you can make fractals out of everything.
Yeah.
And so it's not to say you can't make a really beautiful form from it.
And our colleague John Eads at Left Coast Bonsai has proven out that you can defoliate an alder, at least one in a greenhouse, like 6 or 7 times in a single summer.
Yeah, I do that here with the ones that we have.
Yeah.
I actually think that the branches are more sustainable on that, or at least appear in the initial my experiments than cottonwood.
Yep. I definitely agree with my alders so far.
Yeah, so that's exciting. The thing I would say about alder though is I wouldn't invest in growing young ones. And again, this is just a personal opinion. So if you have a passion for alder, please start an alder nursery and geek out on that passion.
Yeah.
But for me, because it doesn't have that X factor, I probably wouldn't invest in growing young ones when I can probably find an interesting big one out in the landscape.
Yeah, I guess it's worth noting, like, these are species that are just so populous in our, no pun intended, in our region.
Yeah.
There are so many of them, I mean, to clarify.
Yeah.
That we're just running into them and we're experimenting with them. But I think
they're trees of opportunity.
Yeah, but once you kind of know your stuff in your region, you might want to start leaning towards the things that are behaving a little bit better, that have some extra value, and that give you a passion. So it's not just it's X factor probably first, because I mean it would suck to put so much work for so many years into something that you weren't passionate about.
Yeah,
and then it's kind of like a combination of bonsai process compatibility plus like long-term sustainability.
Yeah.
Those are the two things, right?
But
probably X factor has to be the first gate.
Yeah, it's something that if you're going to be with this plant for the long haul, there's got to be something that makes it worth it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there's not on alder. I mean, something that makes it worth it for me is just an outstanding trunk. So like, even species that I'm not really fond of, if you give me an amazing trunk, I'm going to want to play with it.
Yeah.
But
or you might find that it works really well in a given size format. Perhaps alder is really good for shohin, given the amount of defoliation we can do and tiny little twigs we can sustain. Maybe things like that might factor into your selection when you're collecting in your region.
Yeah, good point.
Something like that.
But yeah, it's you brought up a point just a little bit ago that I want to circle back to, and that's maybe the less romantic things about collecting natives. Things that are not so fun to deal with. And if you're collecting natives that are going to be growing, right around you, you're going to be dealing with leaf pathogens, fungal pathogens, way more often than
you might be bringing them home from the woods.
Yeah, you could be bringing them home, or likely they're just kind of all around you. And I've noticed that with alder, we have this. I think it's actually a mite, like a red.
Oh, the red. I forget what that's called.
Is it a mite?
I'm not sure. I think it's actually a fungus of some kind.
Okay. Yeah, there's some weird thing on an alder that like our native alders here that get this like red.
It's like fairly benign, but it's ugly when it happens.
Yeah, very ugly. And again, whenever you see something on one of your trees, that doesn't look right. It's like
and cottonwoods get a form of
they get some black
/ cottonwood rust.
Yeah, it almost looks like black spot, just way more severe.
Yeah, and that rust or that fungus tends to attack faster than fall color arrives. So like you might get senescence, but you also might, as a result of being down in the mild valleys, be too warm to go to color without the fungus moving in first and ruining your color.
Yeah, this is the not so sexy thing about collecting wild trees is they're going to bring with them the wild pathogens that they have with them, and they're going to be exposed to it in your area if the plant is indeed native, and worse.
Yeah. And borers and things
borers,
like that.
Insects, they're prone to all the things here that love and have been trained and evolved to kind of attack them.
Yeah. On my first cottonwood collecting day, I didn't just get that one that but a couple others that were these gnarly little bastards of wood that were also part of the same root system, the same root network, and they had borers in them. They didn't make it.
Bummer.
But that taught me that The mountains are different. Even rural settings are very different.
Yeah.
Not just outright wildlands, but also rural settings can be more loaded. I forget, I think somebody from Britain was saying something like this a while back, maybe on Ryan's podcast, that there was a difference between pathogens in the urban environment in the commercial nursery environment versus like wildlands.
Well, Ryan and I were actually just talking about that yesterday because like where he is at Bonsai Marai, he's much more kind of into nature than I am here in suburbia. And so like he deals with a lot more kind of the roughness of nature than I do here in where I live. But that's the thing to just keep in mind is with these native plants comes all these native pathogens in a way that if you're growing Shishigashira Japanese maple, that tree was selected because it didn't have all those things. That's why people for the last 400 years have trained that species and because it's been kind of domesticated to a degree.
Yeah, or selected, or even hybridized on purpose.
Yeah,
I think there are some cases. I would say, I think I've seen things like, for sure, I've seen several cultivars of sugar maple.
Yeah.
So if I'm somewhere in Ontario, Quebec, Maine, New York, et cetera, Ohio, maybe I'm thinking, I want sugar maple because I'm really into sugar maple as a part of my regional identity as a bonsai artist. But maybe I should go to the nursery and check that stuff out first.
Yeah. Well, with red maple, there's a ton. Acer rubrum, like there's October Glory or something like that.
There's a lot.
There's Autumn Sunset. Like there's like. These trees have a level of domestication of selection that make them special and are more disease resistant. And so that's something to keep in mind. Like if you love native trees, maybe there's a cultivar or selection of a native tree that if you're going to grow from scratch, you might as well grow something that's going to beat a lot of these odds. If you're collecting a tree from the wild, my philosophy is it better have a pretty good trunk because because you're gonna have to deal with all of those extra things. Otherwise, if grow something that's gonna grow easily, not something that's gonna be constantly attacked by your surroundings. But so we talked about cottonwood, we talked about alder. A lot of people, when they think of the Pacific Northwest and collecting deciduous, the one that they think of is vine maple. My teacher, Michael Hagedorn, has kind of he kind of put vine maple on the map. He has several incredible examples.
It's a species that has a lot of Japanese feeling, not just in the results from the process, but also from just nature.
It's the only maple in the palmatum family that grows outside of Asia. There you go. It came across on that Alaska bridge or something.
The Bering Bridge.
So it's now vine maple is a little bit closer to the full moon maple than it is normal Japanese maple in terms of its kind of characteristic, its habit, its training. But it still makes a wonderful, wonderful example for bonsai. And just go on Michael Hagedorn's website, Crataegus Bonsai, and you'll be able to see quite a few good ones. Or if you live in the Pacific Northwest, definitely go check out his garden, book a garden tour because
it does test the limits of some of the things that we've been talking about, though, in the sense that it's not as fast developing as a Japanese maple. There is some challenges.
It's more difficult to work with than Japanese maple.
It's a good example of what we've been talking about generally, right? There's going to be these pluses and minuses, and it's not. It hasn't been hyper selected down for pruning, for hedging.
That's right.
Like most of the things we have experience with.
Yeah, it doesn't respond as well to full defoliation as normal Japanese maple might. But you can do a lot of the things. And because it's a maple, we do have a proven track record for sustainability and longevity as a bonsai subject. And so like you can pinch it just like normal Japanese maple. You can do the partial defoliation. You can horticulturally treat it very much the same. There are minor differences, but you have kind of a good roadmap with vine maple in a way that we don't necessarily have with cottonwood.
Riff off of Japanese maple ideas.
And so vine maple is a bit of a contradiction to the previous plants that we've talked about because it's one of the species here, and it's not to say you can't find a big one and trunk chop it, but it's one of the species here that my teacher Michael and I, with just one example, have found an interesting tree that kind of looked like a bonsai and we didn't have to cut a lot off. Michael had this beautiful vine maple in the Artisan's Cup in 2015, where he planted it on this big tower that's reminiscent of the little tram that goes up to the OHSU.
And it has a
hospital
descending
here.
canopy from this tower.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful cascade down this moss tower, fern
tree.
tower. It's an incredible tree. It's one of my favorite pieces Michael's ever done, and it was actually one of the things that made me want to study with him when I saw it at the Artisan's Cup, because that was when I started conversation about apprenticeship. So it was a really important tree for me.
It kind of sounds like his mind had to be open to whatever form was available from the material.
Yeah,
while he was out in the field.
Yeah, he wasn't
collecting.
necessarily looking for vine maple. He just found a really interesting plant, something that gave him a lot of room to work as an artist.
Yep.
And so he's been able to find some really incredible ones. Now, he probably has, half a dozen examples of beautiful vine maples. I haven't been so lucky. I've gone out looking for vine maple. I'm a little bitter about vine maples. I've gone out looking for them 10 or 15 times, and I've only found one. And so it's not like Cottonwood or Alder, where I think the yield is much higher when you're going out and collecting. I think it's really a lot of hunting, a lot of searching with very low payoff.
It's high population, so you get excited at first.
Yeah.
But then very low yield.
Yeah. So what we mean by that is you go out and you see them a lot, but you don't see the ones that Michael has a lot.
They're just immediate no's, in other words.
Yeah. It's just straight.
I'm not digging that up.
That first 2-3 feet that we talked about is important is really, really boring. And so
A lot of clumps, though.
There are clumps. Yeah.
Little explosions of seedlings in one spot.
And Michael does have one clump that is just a really gnarly, crazy kind of root mass. That's cool.
I went collecting a couple of years back with Carmen, and we found an explosion of seedlings in one spot, of vine maple seedlings in one spot, and one of them had grown out as an arc, like a rainbow arc, and had continued over, like as a rainbow arc, all the way to the other side, to the pot of gold, and had rooted itself into the ground on the other end.
Well, that's the theory about vine maples, is that they travel. This is like a native. You know about this?
I didn't know about this. No.
Yeah. So the theory on vine maples is I have a book on trees in the Pacific Northwest, and it says a lot of the native tribes suspect, and many scientists have kind of backed this up, that vine maples will, over the course of many hundreds of years, will walk through the forest. So because it's a tree that's more kind of horizontal than it is vertical.
Makes sense, yeah.
It kind of bends down, roots itself, and then you could have a vine maple that you collect here, and really 1,000 years ago the tree was growing over 1,000 feet over there.
I had the same thought about the cottonwood on that rockfall site, where the whole hillside may have been one cottonwood that was just gradually moving a couple miles per century.
Yeah.
That's a crazy thought.
Yeah, it's nuts to think about.
Yeah, but it gives you an idea of like what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
On the site, and how to think about where these things grow.
Yeah.
How to look around a given site. When you find one of something, maybe you should look around and kind of examine your surroundings.
That's right, because you're probably going to find more of it, even though vine maples are a little difficult in that. But they are out there, and if you're listening to this podcast and you want a vine maple and you're wondering why there's none for sale, it's because we can't find them. It's because they are very difficult, low yield trees to collect in a way that I don't think cottonwood is going to be, or some other species. It's not to say that there's a million cottonwoods out there for that are suitable for bonsai, but I think I've been able to find 3 in one spot versus the one spot that I've collected, my one vine maple that I have. I've been there 15, 20 times, and that was the only one I found.
Yeah, and there's some spectacular ones that would just be very difficult to cut out of lava, for lack of a better. The environment in which we collect them is really challenging.
Can be treacherous.
Yeah.
That's actually super treacherous where we collect them. Is like one of the most dangerous collecting sites I go to.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely difficult to hike through there.
It's worth it, because it's like such a gorgeous species that I'm going to keep hunting for it. I probably won't have a lot of sales material of it in the future, but I'm going to try and find some gems for myself, because it really is of all of the trees that we have here in the Pacific Northwest, I think it's going to be the most kind of bulletproof in terms of, once you can, find one, it's going to be really special.
It's interesting you talk about bulletproofedness of vine maple. This is maybe a species where the cultivars, for me at least, don't seem as interesting. And they do exist. I'll say one thing though is that they're or two things. They're very expensive, and usually the form in which you find them at the nursery, they're not interesting. They don't give me anything extra form wise.
Yeah.
And in fact, I have to reset all the way back to the base because they're usually grafted.
It's a really good point. Yeah, the nursery ones for me, I have nothing against nursery stock. A lot of my garden is nursery stock. The nursery stock vine maples just don't do it for me.
Yeah.
And it's interesting
because
because
they can be beautiful.
They're beautiful as garden plants, and they have some nice small leaf varieties, some red or purple leaf varieties. But I think what it is, and maybe we're just too many generations. Or not enough generations into vine maple to appreciate it. But if you think about Japanese maple in the wild, it grows more similar to vine maple than it does the way that we think of Japanese maples growing in homes or gardens or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It's an understory.
It's a big sprawling.
It's an understory elegant tree, sprawly tree. Vine maple is very much the same. And so we don't have like a lot of vine maples that are kind of more bonsai form like we do. It's hard to separate in our mind. I have a Japanese maple here in the Tokunawa behind the camera. It's hard for me to think about a Japanese maple that doesn't look like that in my mind.
Yeah,
but that's not how it grows.
We're looking off camera at a tree that's a very traditional Moyogi style Japanese maple, and from a Kokofu album for sure.
Yeah. And that's, I think, a similar analogy to vine maple, except you and I, being here in the woods, we know what vine maple looks like in its native environment, and it's very different than that bonsai that's sitting over there. Yeah. And so when we're looking for when we're looking for vine maples, we're looking for ones that are reminiscent of that native character that they have. They're more sprawly, more elegant, these kind of octopus-like kind of branches.
Yep.
And so we don't tend to think of them as these kind of more formal traditional trees. It's not to say that you can't do it. And like I said, it's probably not a species you would want to do that with or maybe put too much effort in, because it is a more difficult species to grow than just some regular Japanese maple.
Yeah.
And so
I find this point interesting because the form that you can expect to create as a bonsai from a vine maple is dictated somewhat by your literacy in bonsai.
That's right.
I'm super confident that Michael Hagdorn can make a really good vine maple bonsai, but absent of all of my study with him and you, I'm not confident that I would have ever concluded that vine maple is a viable bonsai species.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's limited by my understanding of where I could take it, and it does strike me as a species that's sort of like non-obvious. It's not as quick to respond.
Yeah.
We can't work with it as dramatically.
Well, I think that's a really good point of encouragement for wherever you are listening to this podcast, because even I'm sure there's stuff like in Arizona and New Mexico that's untapped. I was driving across the country to Texas a year or two ago, and there were these amazing broadleaf oaks with small leaves down there. I was like, how come I've never seen one of those as a bonsai? And I think it's probably just because there hasn't been a bonsai professional that's settled in that area that was looking for something that was special. Or just a high-level enthusiast, right?
To build some keystone examples within the community.
And again, it goes back to my point earlier. It's like when I go collecting, I'm not looking for a cottonwood or a vine maple. Well, sometimes I am, but I'm not directly looking for something specific. I'm open to whatever I see quality-wise.
Yeah. That would be arrogant, right? To walk out there and be like, I'm going to find exactly this.
Yeah, I'm going to find a Cascade vine maple. You're probably least likely to find it when you're...
Maybe none of us will ever find what Michael found for that one Cascade vine maple ever again.
Yeah, and if that's what I'm focused on and looking for, then I'm going to miss this other interesting thing that's really unique and special that might be right in front of me the whole time. One of the weird plants I've collected is a mountain huckleberry. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting... Huckleberry vaccinium's interesting for me just because it feels more like a woody kusamono than actual bonsai.
And it dies back in ways that are confounding to logic or it's hard to form an intellectual framework around vaccinium.
It's a little different. But mine's actually been really sustainable. I've had very little dieback on it. I do control the suckers, which we've talked about helps a lot. But it's just kind of stayed this really kind of fantastical, crazy ikebana-esque kind of thing.
And Michael Hagedorn also has some vaccinium in the form of blueberry.
Yeah.
And he's also said similar things where I asked him a bit about how he treats his blueberry, because I have a blueberry, and he was just kind of in his trademark way, just kind of I don't know, I just sort of go with the flow, and I'm like, that's cool. It's cool that
you just do good bonsai.
Exactly.
And good results happen.
But I guess the thing that I got from him at that moment was that he kind of goes with the flow of it for a little bit at first. He learns the habit, the sort of the way that the tree behaves for a little bit before he acts.
Yeah, which is very much what you and I are doing with cottonwood to kind of bring it back home. Is that
we are now, but at first that was a total tree murder. So but yes.
Yeah, we're seeing we're seeing what we get, and we're kind of responding to that thing that the tree gives us.
Yeah, and whatever we figure out of the sustainable process is gonna, I think, in turn, sort of affect the aesthetics that we can hope for.
That's right.
Maybe even the tree sizes that we can, the size classes we can hope for.
Yeah.
Maybe Shohin won't work. Maybe Shohin will be the only one that works. I don't know, right?
Yeah, these are all open questions that we're trying to be very intentional about these trees with us. Like we're not saying, oh, we are going to do this with these trees. We're very open to the possibility with these species that nobody's really worked with at large numbers before. We're approaching it with an open mind. And I think that's the right way to do it when you're collecting something that, maybe you live in Montana and you're collecting this Rocky Mountain maple that you've never seen as a bonsai before, and you just kind of have to approach it with that open mind, because
I ran into Rocky Mountain maple for the first time in the Cascades a few months ago.
Yeah.
I was just astounded that I had even found one.
Yeah, it's way less common out here.
It's way up higher. Yeah.
Super high.
You have to go hiking.
Yeah.
With a capital H.
Yeah. But yeah, just be open to what these trees are going to give you. Be open to the different styles that you're going to come across, and if you approach it with an open mind and some creativity, I think you'll find the deciduous tree either on the East Coast or the West Coast that's gonna, or in the middle of the country, that's gonna work well for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, thanks for tuning in. You've been watching the Deciduous Bonsai podcast on RAKUYO's Deciduous Bonsai channel. I'm Andrew Robson.
Maciek.
And we will see you next time. All right. It's like 56 minutes in.
Oh, wow. We didn't even